welcome to another episode of The Office Visit with Dr. Tom Pritchard. I'm your host, Matt McCormick, and as always, I am joined by the good doctor himself, Dr. Tom. Great to see you.
You know what I was thinking?
Lay it on me. You've got an hour.
We need a receptionist for the office visit. I think that would
A receptionist?
A receptionist to make sure that no foreign people with any negative vibes come in to visit us.
Well, funny you should mention the word foreign because the title of this very episode is called Foreign Territories. We are going to take a trip overseas. We're going to go to Japan, Mexico, India, all over the world, and we're going to talk about professional wrestling in these different countries.
Well, I know for one thing that Japan was very, very ripe with professional wrestling going back to the days of Ricky Dozan and Freddie Blassie, and that kind of opened the door for the American gaijin, if you will, to go over to Japan and not only make a lot of money, but have a lot of exciting and brutal matches that transcended their stardom from the United States all the way over to the land of the rising sun.
Talk about just the difference in culture as far as professional wrestling goes between the United States and Japan. What's the main difference?
Well, I think the main difference in Japan being an island and so there's not as much obvious land mass in Japan as there is in the United States, but for the American wrestlers to go over to Japan and understand it's a different culture, a different style, was pretty interesting for a lot of the guys in the early 50s and the early 60s. I think it pretty much gave everyone a new opportunity to go to a foreign land like Japan and draw great houses in the sumo halls, the sumo arenas, and show a style that maybe the Japanese haven't seen before and adapted and enjoyed. I mentioned Ricky Dozan was the first superstar of professional wrestling, and it was all Japan Pro Wrestling, if I'm not mistaken. And he was considered a god. He was considered the Japanese Hulk Hogan before there was a Hulk Hogan. And everywhere this guy went, he was treated as a superstar, a megastar, a rock star, a movie star, if you will. So, but for the Americans to go over and stay, I think the tours back then were anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. And if you got over with the Japanese people who were very, very hard to impress.
How about compared to Boston?
No, there's nothing compared to Boston. But for the most part, the Japanese fans would sit and watch the match, and if something big happened, they would applaud, nice polite golf clap. But other than that, they would watch the match, kind of like a golf game. They would wait for something big to happen.
What was the schedule like? You said it was 4 to 6 week tours, but what weekly towns? How did that work?
No, I think the tours would start out, you would go from different points in the island. Maybe go to Kurikan Hall and do a TV, and that would start the tour. Then you'd go to various places all over the island, make your way up and then down and back to Tokyo. You would do TVs maybe 3 times during a 6-week tour or something like that. And hit different towns. I went to Japan, I think, 5 times in my career. So I was able to go in the summer, I was able to go in the spring, I was able to go in the winter. I think twice I went in the wintertime. So in Japan, the wintertime is very, very interesting because you have snow sometimes as tall as the building. And, people would still come out in these freezing cold buildings to watch wrestling. And the Japanese wrestlers had a different way of training. The Japanese wrestlers were very, very disciplined and took wrestling seriously. They would work out hours before the matches, doing squats and running and push-ups and, of course, wrestling prior to the matches. And then you'd get in the ring and they would wrestle. And then they would set up the building, set up the arena, chairs, as well as the ring. So, I mean, the culture in Japan was very respectful and very hard compared to what we did in America.
How did the angles or the storylines differ from in America? Because you mentioned it's a different atmosphere, different culture. So how did they get stuff over?
Well, it's still professional wrestling. I mean, the bottom line is you have a good guy, you have a bad guy, so to speak, but not in the traditional heel babyface
Right.
in America. So I guess even if you were a good guy in America, you could go to Japan and be considered a bad guy, even though the fans respected you. Example, Stan Hansen would be considered a heel coming over here and being a tobacco chewing, roping, um, goat roping cowboy, or he had his cowbell on the end of his rope and swinging it over here he might be considered a heel. But in Japan, he was this rough, rugged Texan and considered a hero, even though he was doing the same thing by knocking the living hell out of the Japanese fans as he come to the ring. So people appreciated that because he was larger than life. Bruiser Brody the same way, coming to the ring, stomping, throwing chairs,
Chase people off.
chase people off. But I mean, that was the atmosphere and culture that the wrestling fans were used to in Japan, and they enjoyed it because it was like Godzilla coming through the crowd. And, yeah,
So
bad,
when
man.
you say Stan Hansen would knock the hell out of people on the way to the ring, elaborate on that.
He would swing his bull rope, and if people were around, they got hit with the bell. They got hit with the bull rope.
With the belt too?
Yes, and it was their fault for not getting out of the way. Whereas in America, you did that here.
That's
man.
why I'm picturing somebody walking down the aisle on Monday Night Raw and decking a fan.
Well,
It's not good.
again, that was before they had the railings
Right.
and whatever else they had, the ramp. But in America, you'd be sued. In Japan, they look at it as an honor, a badge of honor. You know, so it was a lot more discipline, and people were very, very respectful and were appreciative of a wrestling move or a wrestling match.
And the style in Japan has always been talked about as being a little bit more stiff.
Strong style.
Strong style,
Yes.
thank you.
Yes,
You
well,
experienced that over there?
yes, it did actually.
How'd
And,
that work out for
well, you were in for 5 to 6 weeks of getting your head knocked off, and you had to knock his head off too, because that's what people
Right.
expected. And that was one of the greater revelations in my career, is going over there and finding out that you had guys in this business who understood what their job was to make people believe in what we were doing in the ring. And in Japan, that was emphasized, because if you hit somebody and it didn't connect, they weren't going to sell it, and they're going to let you know that that didn't matter.
Right.
So you would go over and from the first match to the last match, you laid it in, and you realize that those guys, the young boys, were taught from day one that this was a sport. And yes, we're drawing people, and yes, it's manipulated, but this is still a sport. And I don't know that they smarten the guys up until sometimes a lot farther along in their career. You know, they would tell these guys to go out and grab your best hold and win if you can.
Right.
You know, there's a famous match on YouTube between Andre the Giant, and I can't think of the guy's name right now.
We'll look it up.
Of course we will. And I'm sure our editor
Yes.
will get us the name later on.
Absolutely.
Before this episode is out, I'm sure. I'll put it right there on the
screen. Yeah.
On the screen, yes. But Andre is upset at something, and Andre won't sell anything for this young guy. And eventually, the young guy just says to hell with it, and he's going to get out of the ring. And you see Inoki come to the ring, you see all the other guys come to the ring, and it becomes a little bit of a fiasco. You can tell Andre is being uncooperative. And you know, I'm sure after that, they talked it out or worked it out, however they did. But it is definitely one of those things you have to see to believe when you go over it.
Right. So we'll talk about the American guys in a second, but you mentioned some more top draws in Japan, the Japanese guys.
Antonio Inoki, Giant Baba, again, Ricky Bazan was the first godfather of Japanese wrestling. But Riki Choshu, Fujinami, who just was recently inducted into the Hall of Fame. I wrestled Fujinami first in Los Angeles, and that got me my first Japanese tour. you know, some of those guys knew how to work and understood it was entertainment meets reality, if you will. And were athletic, but also knew how to connect with people. And that was the biggest thing. Masa Chono, coming in later on, was also a huge star because he understood how to connect with this generation
Right.
of wrestling fans. So it's still professional wrestling, but they take it and took it a lot more seriously in Japan.
And Inoki, of course, goes on to become a dignitary there.
And Sasuke, too.
Yes,
Right,
absolutely.
The great Sasuke was.
Being from West Virginia, I pronounce it Sasuke.
We say Sasuke, Japan, and Dragon, what was a Dragon? Well, Dragon come WWF, Ultimate Dragon.
Ultimate Dragon.
Hi. So, thank you. And of course, Fujinami, Hakushi.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of some of the other guys that came from Japan.
So American guys that went over there, and we mentioned Stan Hansen, but also there's some others.
The Funks,
Steve
DiBiase, yeah.
Williams.
Yeah, the Funks, DiBiase, Steve Williams, Terry Boyd, Dick Murdoch. You know, the guys who went over and really stayed there, made a name for themselves, and would go back there on a regular basis. That was where they made their money. You know, later on, I want to say maybe starting in the late 90s, early 2000s, Japan became a lot like the States, where they had more companies start up like a little territory. And in that span, in that space of the island, there's not really that much room for more than two companies. You know, before it was New Japan and All Japan.
Right.
Then I remember Wing.
Big Japan.
Yeah. So I mean, there's now it's more or less from what I understand. You have pretty much an office on every corner.
Yeah.
And if you want to be a wrestler, it's not as hard as it used to be in Japan.
Right. There's some American guys that really had their greatest success over there. I think Stan Hansen's one of them. So.
Yeah. Stan, Bruce Brody, again, the Funks made a living over there for a long, long time. Dick Murdoch, and you know, the big American stars could make money in Japan because they drew. And they had the sumo halls, they had the egg dome,
Right.
and things like that, where people in Japan would look at wrestling and wrestlers as these bigger than life gods. And when they would go to the ring, you had big men, and they were knocking the hell out of each other.
Believable.
Yeah, very believable. Big Man Vader went over and made his name in Japan, and then became a big draw in the United States afterwards. So that's a case of going one place and getting over, and then coming back over here and
Right.
making money.
Absolutely. Okay, so, one more thing. The plane ride to Japan, what's that like?
Long, but once again, you know, it just depends on who you were. I can remember the first few times going over, you always have nice business class, which is just as nice as first class. So it's not so bad, but the last, take that back, the time before the last, you know, was you don't want to travel in economy going to Japan. I mean, you can't.
20-hour flight?
Sorry?
20 hours?
I believe so. I can't tell you the exact hours because I just went to sleep. But, yeah, but it wasn't that bad, man. You look forward to getting there. I look forward to getting there. How about that?
Anything else you'd like to mention about Japan?
I like Japan. I had a great time in Japan.
They speak highly of you.
Huh?
They spoke very highly of you.
I'm sure they did, but I mean, that's where I learned how to eat Korean barbecue, by the way. I mean, if anybody has not tried Korean, have you ever had Korean
I have
barbecue?
not.
Try Korean barbecue.
Okay.
Find a Korean barbecue place and get Korean barbecue. That's where I first ate Korean barbecue was in Japan, not
We'll
in
see
Korea.
if we can't get that in catering.
Is there anything here
Isn't
that
that-
you can order Korean
I
barbecue?
don't think so.
How about, ask her.
I will. Absolutely. He'll take the time to yell at us.
Yeah, I'm sure.
How about, you know what, this is not on here, but let's talk about Korea real quick. We mentioned this in the last episode, but WCW ran in North Korea, I think mid-90s, early to mid-90s.
Yeah. Yeah.
100,000 people, Flair and Inoki.
Yeah.
Huge main event. Did you know any of the guys that went over? Well, I know you knew them, but did you ever talk to the guys that went over there about?
No, I never actually talked to Flair or anyone who went up there about Korea, but you have to stop and think for just a second. North Korea is a communist country, correct?
Yes.
Therefore,
Very much so.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. So therefore, you're not really given a lot of freedom or leeway. But
Right.
yet, you had over 100,000 people come to this stadium to watch a professional wrestling match. Now, granted, it's Antonio Inoki and Ric Flair, but for that many people, whether they were marched there or not, I don't know. But to come out and watch this event, you know, when they saw these two superstars, and plus I'm sure they had an undercard to dazzle and razzle and get ready for the main event. Think about that. These people have never seen anything like professional wrestling before, so it's all brand new, and you're seeing Flair versus Inoki. You know the match had to be entertaining.
Sure.
It had to be quality. Flair wore a robe, I'm sure, and Inoki wore his regals and all his regal
Almost like the old gladiators.
Yeah.
You know, in the middle of a coliseum.
Yeah, so I mean, here's North Korea, not really familiar with professional wrestling and not really familiar with Ric Flair or Antonio Inoki. For the first time seeing these two mega stars coming out and doing battle, can you imagine what they thought?
My two favorite stories, both of them are read in Flair's book. The first one was Scott Norton was over there, and as soon as he gets to his room, he picks up the phone and calls his wife, and she says, "How is it?" And he said, "This place sucks." Well, the phone went dead. He didn't have a phone for the rest of the tour. Right. The other one, Flair said, he talks about being at the airport, getting ready to come home. They want him to do a press conference. So Flair gets up there and talks about what a great opponent Inoki was, really puts over the match and the show. And in the papers, it's Flair praising the leader, the dictator.
Well, of course. And that's, I mean, but you have to understand, you know, where we live, we're not used to, you know, we're not used to going someplace where we're suppressed and change our words. Although that does happen, I'm sure, in places. But in North Korea and things like that, I mean, just to have the opportunity to go and perform would have to be something.
Would you have been nervous about going to a place like North Korea?
Oh, by all means. Yeah, it's like, you know, we talked about before of a place like China or Russia, you know, that people that WWE being a global brand is certainly looking at. Because these are untapped markets. Why wouldn't you look at that?
Right.
Why wouldn't you look at the places you have not been to and hope to gain a whole brand new audience? But if you're in your right mind, you would have to be nervous to go over there and worry about what if you said the wrong thing, what if you did the wrong thing. You know, we talked about Kuwait.
Were you on that tour?
No. But I saw the tape. I saw what happened. I thought, Vader, what are you thinking? You know, Van Vader grabbing a host of the morning show after he challenged, I don't know what
he made a disparaging comment.
Yeah. But you're in their country,
Right.
so you can just say, okay, walk off, but
Right.
you don't grab the guy and then not expect something to happen.
Yeah, he was actually in jail. He was detained. He couldn't come home with the rest of the crew.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, I would be nervous. I mean, I would certainly watch what I did and said, but yeah, I would be a little apprehensive with that. We'd have to be.
How about let's talk about Mexico?
Ooh.
Now, that's been a hotbed for professional wrestling for years and years and years. Do you have any of your own experience in Mexico?
Yeah, I've wrestled in where is across the California border. Is Tijuana?
Yeah.
Of course.
If not, our editor will yell.
My geographic knowledge is not as well or not as good as it used to be. But I wrestled El Gran Goliat, well, the Great Goliath,
Thank you.
in Mexico. And I remember this about the rings. They were solid board. There was no spring to it. There was no give.
You mean it's not like a trampoline?
No, it's nothing like a trampoline. And write that down too. But this was the hardest, one of the hardest rings I've ever wrestled in before I got to WWE. Yeah,
Right.
They were pretty
I knew that
hard
was
too. Yeah. So, but in Mexico and plus the Mexican fans are very, very passionate, very, very loud, and opinionated as well. So if they don't like you as a gringo, you are dead meat. So that was my experience in Mexico. You know, I was a young white meat babyface against a veteran Mexican tough wrestler in El Gran Goliat.
How about some of the more famous wrestling families that come out of Mexico?
My God, man, you have to start with the Guerreros because everyone knows about Eddie Guerrero, Chavo, and Hector and Mondo. But I mean, it started with their father, Gory Guerrero, and El Santo, Blue Demon, or as they say in Mexico, the Blue Demon. Anyway, Mil Mascaras. There were so many great Mexican wrestlers who transcended their careers, I guess, from Mexico over to the United States. Even if you weren't a fan in the beginning or didn't know anything about them, once you saw them work, once you saw them wrestle, you couldn't help but become a fan. Not everybody was a high flyer. Mil Mascaras in the 70s, pretty damn agile and different for that time. But you had El Santo, and you had Gory Guerrero before that. Ricky Romero in West Texas was a guy who pretty much stayed in West Texas and made his name because he didn't have to go anywhere else. Right. But the Mexican people, Mexican fans were very, very passionate and got behind their heroes like nobody else.
Terry Funk says that when Romero was in the ring, Ricky, to be exact, the concession stand tacos outsold cheeseburgers like 12 to 1.
Well, you know what? Yeah, I mean, maybe they did because they were, they were right there in Albuquerque. But I remember watching Rapid Ricky Romero wrestle, and he wasn't. Again, I didn't see it until I saw it. I watch him on TV, but then until I saw it live, and when he walked out of the dressing room going to the ring, it was that charisma, it was that something about him just drew your attention right off the bat. And when he got in the ring, he was fast, he was quick, and he was no wrestler. He knew how to sell. That was me.
What was the Mexican wrestling landscape like? We talked about how Japan was. What about Mexico? Did you do the same thing? Did you do tours? Did you do 4 to 6 weeks? How did that work?
No, if you went to Mexico, you were there working the area. But here's the deal: in Mexico, they have so many shows, or they had so many shows. You could work 7, sometimes anywhere from 8 to 9 or 10 times a week. 2 or 3 times on Saturday and Sunday. Work on a show here and then here. An afternoon show, a later afternoon show, and an evening show. So they were going everywhere in Mexico. There were so many offices. You could make a pretty decent living. At this present day, I couldn't tell you how Mexico is laid out and how they're making a living. But back in the day, you could base yourself out of Mexico City, and there were so many shows in the surrounding area that guys were working sometimes 10 or 12 times a week.
Are there any American guys that you can think of, like we named the guys that went to Japan and did big business? Who are some Americans that went to Mexico?
I think Art Barr would have to stand out. Art Barr and Eddie Guerrero formed a tag team, I think, called Love Machine. Norman Smiley made a huge impact in Mexico.
Chris Jericho, too.
Chris Jericho, yeah. Chris Benoit, I believe he went to Mexico and made a name for himself. So, I mean, it was a place.
The guys we're naming here, though, it's funny that they're all similar style.
Yeah.
Jericho,
Benoit. But and they were well-rounded. And going to Mexico, you had to learn that style to survive because Mexico was a different style. You had to work a different side. Here in the States and other places, the universal side that you wrestle on or work is as those in business. No, it's the left side. You grab the left arm, you grab the left leg. In Mexico, they do everything with the right arm or the right leg. At least that's what you think. But come to find out, you can wrestle some guys in Mexico, and while they're working your right side, they go to the left all of a sudden. So you had to learn, and that's what Jericho and Art Barr and a few others had to learn, that Mark Jindrak, by the way, don't ever forget Mark Jindrak, because he went to Mexico and really stood out Whereas here in the States, there was something about Mark Jindrak that just didn't click. But in Mexico, for whatever reason, he got over.
That's interesting. I never knew that.
Yeah, Mark had a great, I think, a good 5-year run, and he had a great name too. That our editor will get back with us on. But the point is this, Mark Jindrak was a big, great, good-looking kid. Couldn't necessarily translate that here, but in Mexico, it made him a big star.
But when I think about Mark Jindrak's style or what we saw in WCW and over here, he wouldn't be my first guess as somebody that would go down there and make a ton of money.
Yeah, well, look it up. You can Google it too.
It's on YouTube.
Yeah.
So, and just also want to highlight, you talked about having heat in Mexico. I mean, it was pretty intense, right? If you were over as a heel.
If you were over as a heel, but I remember hearing stories about people getting in a cab and traveling from their hotel going to the arena. And you have to watch out for the gangs in Mexico. You have to watch out for the cartel or some of the unscrupulous people in Mexico, because they would get in a cab and rob you, and the cab driver was either in on it or acted like he wasn't.
Right.
But there was a racket going on in there. And, I remember it happened to one of the guys who driving to the arena, and as soon as they got in, they realized it was this wrestler, and they said, "Holy Christ!" and got out of the cab. And you know what I mean? So they're ready to rob this guy.
That's great.
Oh no, man, it's true, man.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
they got out of the cab and ran. So it's like, oh, man. how do you justify living there after that? I don't know.
Well, another place that's similar to that would be Puerto Rico.
Yes. Now, I have ventured to Mexico. I've never had the opportunity to go to Puerto Rico, and nor would I like the opportunity to go to Puerto Rico to wrestle. But from all the stories and firsthand accounts that I had, what an easy territory. You fly in, you get to the hotel, you can stay on the beach all day. You have to leave for the arena maybe at 5, maybe 6. Everything was within 100 miles. The island's not that big.
Right.
But, once you get to the arena, again, if you're a gringo and you're one of those guys that they don't really care for, I mean, I've heard from urine, rocks, batteries, anything that people can get their hands on, they don't mind throwing it at the guys.
Did the Freebirds ever go to Puerto Rico? Because I'm thinking they might not have minded.
No, they might not have minded that urine coming their way. But I don't know. I don't think they might have. The Freebirds might have ventured to Puerto Rico, but I doubt it. Michael was kind of want to stay in the States, I think.
And of course, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention Puerto Rico had its fair share of controversy.
Well, yeah.
Of course, the death of Bruiser Brody.
Right, and everyone going to Puerto Rico up until the time of the Brody incident happened had nothing but good things to say about Puerto Rico. You can make good money there. While you might have had some security issues, they were taken care of for the most part. And you had some ball fields. Roberto Clemente ball field, I guess, was the most famous one that they wrestled in, and drew good houses. But then when the incident took place with Bruiser Brody, we can recount it all day long, but I don't know that that's necessary. I think that was a huge turning point in business. It was a huge turning point, certainly for the majority of the boys over here to never, ever want to step foot on that island again.
No.
Now, during that time period, there weren't too many places to go to make money, so even though the guys might have said they would never want to venture back to Puerto Rico, they did. And it is what it is, and I believe Carlos is still running over there.
Mm-hmm.
But they certainly haven't recovered from that stain.
And being in the business at the time, did you look at guys differently that did go back after that happened? Did you?
Well, here's the deal about that. in wrestling, you know that there's going to be people who say, "I'll never, ever, ever. That'll never, ever happen. I will never, ever, 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 ever." Okay. You realize that that's what it is. I mean, there's the famous saying is never say never in wrestling.
Right.
Well, you can't ever always believe someone all the time because if they had nowhere to go and that's what they want to do in their business, I mean, you would fly back there and see the guy who did the deed and he's still working there.
Right.
It's got to be a little bit creepy, got to be a little bit weird, but they did. And some guys stuck to their guns and never went back. And I can appreciate that. But you don't know what's going on in somebody else's head.
Right.
I just know that. So I didn't look at them any differently. It's just I always knew they were those kind of people.
What, and I know you didn't have a chance to go, but just from what you know, what was the style in Puerto Rico as compared to the other places?
Wild, bloody, the brawling style, because that's what the island likes. And you had certain places like certain kind of wrestling. And going over to Puerto Rico, they don't want to watch a scientific wrestling match. They want to see two guys fight, four guys fight. They want to see blood and guts. And that's what they gave them, man. I mean, I don't think there was a night on the island that Carlos Colon wasn't fighting and bleeding and sweating and crying for his life, you know. But that's what they like. That's what they want.
You know, the other thing we haven't mentioned that you got to think about is, you know, the language barrier between an American and a Japanese wrestler or a Mexican wrestler, and so you have to know how to work. Otherwise,
Well, that's a pretty key component because I can remember wrestling in Japan the first time, and I only wrestled. I wrestled Fujinami, and they taped it in Los Angeles and went over to Japan. So that's all they really knew about me. And I'm less than a year in the business. So when I lock up with someone or when we're going in the ring, I really don't know what I'm doing. So I can remember the first guy that I wrestled was leading me through the match all by feeling. And that was my first experience with someone just putting me in position. But you have to be ready for that to happen.
Right.
You can't be so tight, so stiff that
Right.
you can't be put in position. Same thing in Mexico. I had a veteran who didn't really care for me too much, but he still put me in position. And that says a lot for the guys in Japan, Mexico, or any place where you had a language barrier. It spoke volumes for the guy who's going to lead the match to be able to take someone who didn't speak his language per se, but to understand that he could speak his other language, which was working in the ring. And that was prevalent.
there's been a lot of top guys in America over the last few years that I don't think went back and survived in an environment like that.
Well, you know that's possible, but it's a lot
That's
of
a
people,
different time.
it is a different time. I was going to say a lot of people put the blame on the guys now, but you can't because nobody can decide when they're going to be born. So nobody can say, well, I wish I would have been born. You can say I wish I would have been born back then and learned that, but that's impossible. So when you're born in this time, born with this, what you have to deal with, then you have to deal with this. And we can always talk about. That's why let me veer off here. I hate when people say, back in my day, kid. Well, okay, but it's not your day anymore. It's today. So you have to do what today calls for,
Right.
and you have to learn what today is.
And
It may work, but it may not.
for everyone watching this, we've got an entire episode at the end of this season dedicated to that very subject. So we'll save that. So did you try to go to Puerto Rico? Or no?
No, I never really tried because I always had a job with some territory over here, and it just the opportunity. No one ever asked. I never asked. I heard the stories, and it would have been cool probably, but it just never came up.
What, like Japan, for example, what do the offices over there feel towards Vince for coming over periodically once a year and running?
I can only harbor a guess that anybody coming in and taking business away from them, especially from the United States wasn't always or isn't always welcome.
Still does. I mean, they still go over there.
Yeah, yeah. But at the same time, they realize it's inevitable because I believe, I could be wrong, I believe, and if I am, we're going to do a lesson.
Absolutely.
But I believe WWE has an office in Japan or over in Asia somewhere. So they're obviously looking at the talent in the various countries because being a global brand and being a global company, that's what you do.
Right.
So Japan companies have to know that times are changing, have been changing, will be changing. So they have to adapt, accept, and do accordingly. But they have
Same
to-
thing in Mexico.
Yeah, same thing, because the world has changed, man. It's not just, this is my piece of the pie and you stay away. It's not the way it works around here. It's a global economy. And Japan and Mexico have even ventured, to come over to the States and run shows.
Right.
So, I mean, they're doing the same thing. It's just who's going to be more successful.
Understood. Let's go up north. Let's go to Canada.
Eight? All right.
Yes.
No, well, I mean, Canada was made up of three different, for all intents and purposes, three different territories.
Right.
You had the Hearts on the West Coast. You had Frank Tunney in Toronto. You had Emile Dupree running his Tours from Hell up on the eastern region of Canada, New Brunswick and things like that. So, I mean, Canada was different in the sense that you had the Great White North, and it is called the Great White North for a reason, because it's cold as hell in Canada. And of course, things are done a little differently, and Tim Hortons has great donuts, don't get me wrong. They're great, but the rest of the stuff sometimes left a little bit, a lot to the taste,
Right.
if you will. But Canada was you were able to, again, work on a nightly basis. And if you were on the West Coast, where Stampede Wrestling was around Calgary, all you had to do was venture down to Seattle and Portland, and you could wrestle in another territory. Same thing with on the East Coast with Emile Dupree running his Tours from Hell, where you
Describe why you're calling it the tour.
because you would cross frozen lakes during that time to get to the next town. Literally, you could get a van, two vans full of wrestlers, and depending on who you talked to, the vans weren't very new, and they weren't always in the best shape, but they did what they could do. And again, if you were a young kid in the business, Chris Jericho made the shots, Lance Storm made the shots. I'm sure we can name others.
Right.
Is that it around?
He'll get with us.
Anyway, but a lot of guys who were just starting out got to go to these territories, and that's how you learned the business back then. You would travel across the frozen tundra or frozen lake on the east coast of Canada and make the town, sometimes 9-hour drives. Get to the town, sleep in a gym, set up the ring the next night, or set up the ring that night, wrestle, sleep, and get up and move on to the next town.
Calgary especially had a long-term effect on the professional wrestling business just by the talent that came out of there.
Well,
Influenced by the Hart family.
to just stick and stay in a moment here with Calgary. Stu Hart, again, a throwback to what real wrestling was back then. He had his famous mansion on the outskirts of Calgary, and would invite all the boys over for dinner and get together. Had a great little system, had a great territory where you could wrestle every night of the week. And I don't know the name of every town on the west side, western part of Calgary or western part of Canada, but I do know that Stu Hart gave his guys enough towns where they could make a decent living, and it was a different style. You had guys from Japan, you had guys from Mexico, you had guys from all over the world come into Calgary to get their feet wet, to get experience as well, which gave you experience. Dynamite Kid, David Boy Smith, Brett, all the Hart kids were there, and they were in this hub of great talent. So they learned from each other, and they learned all various different styles. So whenever they went out anywhere, they were prepared. And that's what Stu had this brotherhood. He had the dungeon where you could come down.
Did you ever go to the dungeon?
No. I did not. I never worked Calgary. I worked Portland, but I never worked Calgary. And I'm sorry I didn't, because I would have loved to have that experience. But, I've talked to enough people, and I've heard the recordings of screams.
Absolute
Grown-
discipline.
Yeah. Grown men just in agony, man. But, it's easy if somebody says, hey, let me get your hand here, let me show you this. But how, try to do that during the match when the guy's actually fighting back. Then you show me something. But, Calgary gave Bret Hart exposure, Owen, Bruce, Diana. I mean, they all got exposure. They all found wrestling, fell in love with wrestling. And if you went through Calgary and you made it, it says a lot about you. I mean, Jim Neidhart broke his teeth in Canada. He got kind of great experience in Canada. The Honky Tonk Man.
Yeah.
A lot of guys went through Calgary and survived in the business.
So, and also talk about they're pretty prideful people, right, in Canada. And, Bret had struggled with that at the end of his WWF run. Was that how most of the Canadians were, or was Bret a special one?
I do believe coming from Canada gives you, and just like the United States, I think any country, I don't want to single Canada out, but I think any country you should be proud of where you come from.
Sure.
But
There's a little something extra there.
maybe so. Bret, look, I've always admired Bret Hart. He's one of the guys I looked at as not only just a tremendous wrestler, but as a stand-up guy and an honorable guy, which you don't find that much in professional wrestling. Surprise, surprise. And but when Bret won the WWF Championship and beat Ric Flair of all people, I think that gives you a reason to be proud. I think that
absolutely.
gives you a reason to think you're pretty damn good. Bret was very damn good. And but what you're saying is sometimes you can get wrapped up in that persona. And Bret's not the only one. He's not the first, and he won't be the last who's got that wrapped up with being a Canadian hero, or being a hero of a certain country, or being a hero of a certain group. And for right, wrong, or the obvious reasons, Bret felt that he was a hero in Canada and shouldn't have lost in Canada.
And real quick before we move on, I don't want to lose sight of something that was very interesting around 1997. The fact that Bret was a heel, the Harts were heels in America, and of course baby faces, not just in Canada, but the other countries that they visited at the time as well.
Well, if you think about it back then again, you position America as this superpower and as this great nation. And I'm proud of being American. I really am. I'm proud of the United States. I'm proud of everything we do. But the rest of the world looking at us as these arrogant, egotistical bullies. So in wrestling, you use whatever you can. And that's what WWE did. They used the perception of the rest of the world, knowing full well we're going to manipulate this storyline to benefit us and make money. And that's what they did. Yeah. Canada would be the baby faces in their own home country, but yeah, those nasty idiot Canadians coming out here talking about our country, we're not going to let that stand.
Yeah, that was awesome. I think one of my favorite quotes was Bret Hart saying that if the United States had an enema, they'd put the plug in Pittsburgh.
Yes, they would. Nothing against Pittsburgh, but I would agree.
Anyways, so moving on. Let's talk. We're going to kind of lump these together. Costa Rica and the Bahamas. We talked a little bit about Roddy Piper in Costa Rica. I believe it was with Flair. But talk about wrestling there.
Well, now again, the story that I've heard about Costa Rica and Jack Veneno. Yeah. Well, the hero of Costa Rica going to wrestle Ric Flair in his home country, and they show him training, they show him running up and down the streets, and I don't know that they had regular wrestling in Costa Rica. So this is a very special event.
Right.
You know, and their hometown hero, their countryman, is going for the World Heavyweight Championship. And of course, we talked about it, but let's talk about it one more time, recount it, is the fact that, you know, Rick asked for a certain amount, and Roddy Piper asked for a spittoon of roses. He likes roses.
He likes the smell.
Yes, he likes to smell roses. Anyway, whatever Roddy asked for, Roddy got. So Ric Flair, well, as they go to the ring, I believe they see armed guards as well.
They do.
And when I think Rick beat Jack or was disqualified or whatever, the armed guards pointed their guns at Roddy and Rick, and Rick went in and proceeded to get pinned, and Jack Venamo,
Whatever his name
Veneo.
He is the reigning NWA World
He was the reigning NWA World Champion at that time, and lasted for about maybe an hour, and or maybe a day, because he might have took pictures with the belt in a press conference. I'm not sure on that. But Costa Rica did not have as rich of a wrestling tradition as a Puerto Rico or a Bahamas or a Canadian.
Did you ever have the chance to go?
No, I never did. But in that same vein, though, I mean, you know, I think it was in Rick and Roddy's health that they might have let Jack hold the belt for a little bit, a couple hours, whatever it may be, and then leave. But going to the Bahamas, you know, that was a territory that was booked outside the Florida area, and they had the Bahamas champion, Tyree Pride, was the Bahamas champion for a long time, and that I heard was a nice little trip. Not a real. It was along the lines of Puerto Rico, from what I understand.
Okay.
You had your very passionate fans, and not always the best arenas, and not everyone was always on time, and nobody got in a hurry in the Bahamas because it's the Bahamas.
Right.
What are you going to hurry for, man?
Right.
You don't want to leave.
You were actually recently in Germany, were you not?
Yeah. Sure.
What was that like?
I had been in Germany before. I wrestled in Bremen. Went for a week. Germany was where you would set up tents for about a month. They would have the same matches in this one huge tent or beer hall for a month. It'd be like a tournament, and every night, you know, you would wrestle, and the guys had motorhomes, they call them, or caravans, you know, out back of the arena. And you would live there, go in the arena, take showers, go to the bathroom, whatever you had to do. And it was a cool thing. Then at the end of that month, you packed everything up, moved on to the next town, and you wrestled there for a month. So during the 80s, that was kind of cool. But this time when I went for 2 weeks and traveled around Germany and Vienna. It's a different business over there now. People just want to see entertainment. And they
Similar to here?
Pardon?
Similar to here?
Similar, yes. But they have their own culture, and they have their own chants and their own songs and their own. It was a little different. It was very cool.
Did you do seminars over there?
I did seminars and I wrestled over there, and it was. I learned that the guys. Look. Wrestling is about telling a story, but the guys think it's about doing spots. Two different things. You tell stories by doing spots at the right time, but not everybody gets that. So I mean, they're falling into that same culture because all those guys have had to watch was WWE. Right. So the German wrestling has also become a little more Americanized and WWE-ized, if you will.
You think of any top German guys from your first time over there?
Otto Wanz, I met Fit Finley over there for the first time. Tony St. Clair, you know, from England, but those are guys from Germany. Yeah. Steve.
Do they have? Let me ask you this: when you were over there, do they have a group of guys like that now, or is it all?
Well, they do. They have their own group. I went for the Extreme Wrestling Federation, Extreme Wrestling Federation, and WXW, Wrestling Extreme. Anyway, again, editor.
Something like that.
I apologize.
Yeah.
No, well, no, it's because, man, I would go, and Axel Dieter Jr. Was over there. His father, Axel Dieter Sr., was a wrestler when I went the first time. And they have their own crew guys, and they're trying to learn. That's why I went over, and a few other guys have gone over and done seminars and tried to tell them, slow down, take your time. This is what you need to do to tell a story. Because once you educate the people to that, then they'll be educated and they'll understand, oh, that's what's happening. Right now, they're just doing the flash and boom, bang, and that's okay, but there's only so much you can see the flash, boom, bang, before you kind of go, okay, we've seen it. So, that's what they're doing now.
In the last episode, you talked about some of the bigger houses that you had been in front of, and you mentioned India.
Yeah.
How was India?
India was interesting because and that's part of traveling to these different places. You get to see the different cultures. You hear about it, but when you see it firsthand, then you have a different outlook and you have a grasp of what's going on. India was one of the poorest countries, in fact, the poorest country I've ever been to. People in the streets with cows walking up and down, people begging for money, people laying by bridges, people laying down by the river that we would pass. I mean, and at the same time, you had your upper class who came to the arena, who could afford the tickets, who wanted to come and see entertainment. But it was very interesting because you heard about the poverty in the world, you heard about people suffering in India. We saw it. We had an opportunity to see it. So very fortunate to be where we were and realize how lucky we really have it.
What office was that for?
WWE. Yeah, very interesting.
I bet it was.
Yeah, we don't want to drink the water over there.
Is that right?
That's very good.
Did any of the boys drink the water?
No, we didn't drink it. We had bottled water. Yeah, even in showers, man, you didn't want to get it in your mouth, your ears, anywhere, and that's kind of hard to do.
Even in the showers?
Yes.
Wow.
Good. They don't have AquaClear water filters over there, by the way. AquaClear.
You should introduce that.
I should.
Next time you're in India.
Yeah, I don't think there'll be the next time, though, Matt.
What, out of all the countries we've discussed here, I know you haven't been to a couple of them, but what was your favorite?
Japan. I'd have to say Japan because Tokyo is kind of a good, real cool place. Ginza, Roppongi, the Hard Rock Cafe was a place that everybody would wind up at. And, of course, the famous Ribera Steakhouse. Everybody had the Ribera jacket. And you go and you say, it's again one of those things you hear about, you go, wow, I want to go to Ribera's, and you get to Ribera's and you say, this is it. I mean, no, it was cool, but it's like, you really expected more, but then you get there and you go, okay, that's what it is.
Well, we're definitely going to put in an order for Korean barbecue.
Korean barbecue.
Next
A lot of garlic, brother.
Running garlic.
Yes. Garlic cloves.
Well, we're out of time.
No!
Yes, we are.
Where does the time go?
The good thing is we've got a few more episodes to go, and we were saving the best for last.
Do we have our editor getting a picture of the Hornet yet?
Well, he's working on it.
Okay.
There's a few floating around. I think there might be something on YouTube. We might
YouTube's your friend.
The other thing you can get on the internet, folks, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and our official website, theofficevisit.com, as well as our parent website, logansworldtv.com, all the latest information, everything you need to know about what we do here at Logan's World TV. Also on theofficevisit.com, you can get you one of these bad boys right here, Dr. Tom. This is the official Office Visit t-shirt. This may hurt a bit, especially if you drink the water in India. I didn't memorize this yet, but a pro wrestling curriculum, advice, suggestions, stories to help the aspiring pro get to the next level. That book is available on the website as well as DVDs, and you can now digitally download the Office Visit on your smartphone, tablet, and laptop, which is pretty awesome.
It is pretty awesome.
No excuses. You don't just have to have Roku anymore. We're coming to you right there from the comfort of your living room, your hotel room, your couch, wherever.
If you're watching The Office Visit in your hotel room, that's awesome.
That's awesome. Absolutely. All right, folks. Again, that does it for this episode. We've got plenty more to come. You're not going to want to miss a thing. For Dr. Tom, I'm your host, Matt McCormick. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the office visit with Dr. Tom Pritchett.